Gemara in Rosh Hashanah gives a listing of the different fasts, different samas. It goes through cataloging them. In the list is Soma Shvi, Gimel Tishrei, that Gedaliah ben Achikom, who was the appointed ruler representing Klal Yisrael, but under the regime of the conquering nation. Responsible to them. He was killed, he was assassinated. The Gemara asks, Umi Holgai, who killed him? The Gemara answers, Yishmael ben Nesanya. Turievan asks, reading the Gemara, he asks, what's the question? It's an explicit verse, it's a posik, where we're taught that the murder was perpetrated by Yishmael ben Nesanya. So what's the Gemara asking? What's the question and what's the answer? It remains with its tzorach. Later on in that Gemara, continuity, same daf, there's a discussion about Megillas Tainus, which was a listing of days that we don't fast. How it applies, how it gets updated. One of the days that's listed is that the Yevonim, the Greeks, had stopped Klal Yisrael from writing the Shem Hashem in a contract. It was nohug one time that they would write the name of the Rebbeinu Shalom in a contractual agreement between two people. The Greeks prohibited it. When they were overthrown, people began to do it again. They were celebrating the freedom now to do so, to be maskir Shem Hashem in a shtar. Chachomim took note of the fact that when the shtar, the contract, was disposed of, it would be thrown away. Disposed of in terms of its financial obligation, it was in fact disposed of physically. And therefore there would be Mechalo Shem Shemayim. So the Chachomim again reenacted not writing the Shem Hashem in a shtar. And the Yontef was, Rashi says, it was a nes that the people listened to the Chachomim. Fascinating. Take a look in the Novi, and we see that Yishmael ben Nesanya, Ubon Yishmael ben Nesanya, Mizera HaMalucha, he was from the progeny, the seed of the Davidic household. And we have a Messiahs that there's a preference that leadership, even in Golus, should be from Beis David. Reish Galusa should be from Beis David, should be from, to keep alive that sensitivity of the role, the providential role of Beis David, and that it's going to be reactivated. So Yishmael ben Nesanya wasn't coming, as it were, from left field. He had a taina. But perhaps we could say that that is what the Gemara is not teaching us an historic fact. That I know from the Pasuk. Who was the murderer? But that is included within the brackets. Let's look at it algebraically. That's included within the brackets. That's part of the tragedy, that somebody can come with a right taina and the wrong application, with a right claim, with the right rationale. And it's the wrong application of the claim. Similarly, what a wonderful thing. We can now write this name of Hashem in the star. We can now write the name of the Rebbeinu Shalom. Let's celebrate it. Freedom, autonomy, thrown off the yoke of the oppressor. Yeah, but the Chachomim have a longer view and a more penetratingly incisive understanding of the implications of the nitty-gritty of human behavior and each door. In this door, if the shtar, the contract's paid up, it's no longer needed, no longer relevant, it'll be thrown away. Even if it has the Shem Hashem in it. And that leads to Chilul Shem Shamayim. So now there's a conflict. My sense of pride in being able to demonstrate, to exhibit my connection to Klal Yisrael, to the Rebbeinu Shalom. I want to write the Shem Hashem. The Chacham say, no, there's a downside. And we're not prepared to pay the downside. It's too heavy a price for the emotional pride, the upside. It's always a cost-benefit analysis. And therefore Rashi says it's a nes, it was a miracle that they were able to listen. Because when people get, in the modern parlance we would say, psyched up, they get emotionally charged with a sense of self-worth, pride, enthusiasm, they don't necessarily make the right judgments on each call. And ultimately, in the final analysis, there must be a surgical understanding, fluoroscoping, x-raying the criteria. What's more important, what's less important? What overrides? How do we act? So that's part of the tragedy, that a good argument, a right sensitivity, can lead us astray as well, if it's not subordinated to the criteria of the halachic process. That ultimately determines. Tosfos later on, Daf Chav Zayin, brings the stira, parent stira in the Kaliyah, that in his Bizmonim for Shmini Atzeres, he talks about that as if it were the creation of the world, Lefi in Tishrei, Lefi Rabbi Eliezer. It's Machlekes, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Tishrei, or Nisan. Later, he seems to contradict himself that in Nisan, he relates to that as the beginning of creation. Tosfos gives an answer which needs a long discussion. that the actual expediting of it was Nisan, but it was all over Machshava. The thought came up in Tishrei. I don't quite understand that, but however we might approach that, possibly that the Rebbeinu Shem created the world with din, and then it was mitigated by that stringent, strict justice was mitigated by mercy. That's Nisan. Perhaps that kind, Bereshis Bara Elokim, and then later Shem Elokim. Needs more discussion, obviously. But there's a Yoz Dvash that takes the same question about the apparent contradiction in the Kaliyah. One place he seems to talk about the beginning of creation as Tishrei, like Rabbi Eliezer, and one place he talks Mazel Tleh, month of Nisan, like Rabbi Eliezer, like Rabbi Yeshua. Says the Yoz Dvash that brings a medrash that initially, before the Chet of Adam Rishon, the planets, the galaxies, everything moved at a much faster pace. Medrash. Second medrash, that the slowdown didn't take place till Motzi Shabbos. Adam Rishon is created on the sixth day, already is Nichshal. He goes into Shabbos and he does tshuva, and he says, Mizmah Shir Liyom Shabbos. But the slowdown doesn't take place till Motzi Shabbos. Yoz Dvash posits that the Yom Revi, the equivalent of Yom Revi, Mazel Tleh, the sun, the moon, were put into place. And that corresponds to time, the creation of time. But according to the initial rate of acceleration, I don't know whether he has a Masera, so he's positing that 11 and a half hours each constellation, 69 hours they went from Mazel Tleh, from the constellation of Nisan, to Mazel Mosnayim, and then Adam was created. So if you're talking about the beginning of time, that's Mazel Tleh. So in fact, the Kaliyah talks about that as the beginning of time. If you're talking about Adam Rishon, that's Mazel Moznayim, Hayom Harasaylam. Now let's follow this. He takes it another step. According to that pace, you were 1/3 of the way into Tishrei when Adam Rishon did tshuva. So the first tshuva of the first man was Yom Kippur. Slowdown took place, Motzi Shabbos. After he was Mechaber, he authored Mizmah Shir Liyom Shabbos. Incidentally, it's a very interesting fallout from this medrash and this approach of the Yoz Dvash is that when you want to measure any of the radioactive lead relationships, uranium, lead, any relationship that exists in the physical, organic, and inorganic world, there was a radical change in the conditions pre-chet and post-chet. Before the chet, everything moved at a much faster pace as per the Yoz Dvash and the movement from Mazel Tlet to Mazel Moznaim. As a result, friction and heat were totally different world. And if friction and heat were different, then it's reasonable to assume that it impacted the environment in a different fashion than we extrapolating from today's criteria, how we try and understand the findings. It's a different world. And of course, what's most interesting about this cheshbon is that this wasn't arrived at as an apologetic post-question. The Medrash predates the question. Okay. So the first tshuva of the first man is Yom Kippur. Gimel Yuma says that if somebody has a bulmus, kind of an attack of hunger that medically constitutes a danger for the person. Talks about an expectant mother that has a bulmus. She's in danger. It's the embryo from within. It's her, but she's the vehicle, even if it's the embryo from within. Of bosa kochim, meat that she's not allowed to eat that's from a korban, or bosa that meat that's just prohibited to eat because it's Isa. So you try and placate her first with some of the gravy, then a bit, and if nothing helps, ein dova oimed b'fnei pikuach nefesh, saving her life trumps the other prohibitions. Later, the Gemara relates a story that an expectant mother on Yom Kippur had a bulmus. So earlier we were talking about that the Issa was the object, not the time zone. Now we're talking about the food per se. It's not Osa, but it's the time zone. It's Yom Kippur. So they brought her to Rav. And he whispered in her ear. Rashi says, what did he whisper in her ear? Simple positive statement, Yom Kippur Hayom. She pulled back, contained herself, pulled her act together, and in fact, she gave birth to a tzaddik. Gemara also relates a case where it didn't help. But there was a case it can help. And if it might help, how come that wasn't attempted as a strategy when the meat per se was prohibited? Why not whisper in her ear? This is treif. This is bosa kochim. You're not allowed to eat it. If it might help, if he's X percentage, why not go through the exercise at least of trying? The answer is it's so improbable because on the unconscious level, there's some relationship to Yom Kippur that the neshama has. Why should that be? Because the first tshuva of the first man was Yom Kippur. So it's ingrained in creation that this day is a resource for tshuva. First tshuva of Klal Yisrael, Luchas Shnias, the second Luchas, the second tablets, Yom Kippur. So there's an unconscious relationship to that. '73 war, Yom Kippur War. I remember standing Mattersdorf. Osamerach had begun, but we had dispersed. The Bachar was a small group. We had begun the year before. So we had them billeted out by different families, communities. I was standing in the Ashkenaz shul, which faces the main road to Tel Aviv, and Yom Kippur is a day you see no traffic. The country is still. And I saw buses and buses and buses. Something was going on. And then they came into shul, and they were recruiting reserves. The Yom Kippur War had burst open. The Egyptians had made the cheshbon, the calculation, that it was the day the Jews would be least prepared. In fact, post facto, they were totally ill-prepared, but it was the easiest day to mobilize because everybody was either home or in shul. It was the only day that traffic would not have been snarled in such a manner as to postpone the mobilization for hours and hours. One day that the secular community, on some level of the unconscious, relates to Yom Kippur. And so we're in a constant interaction. I remember Rav Hutner saying to me one time, that the act of creativity is making conscious that which is on the unconscious level, bringing it to the conscious level, dipping the bucket into the unconscious and picking it up. But it's got to be quantified, it's got to be qualified, it has to be purified, because there's a lot going on the unconscious level. Yishmael ben Nesanya can have a right sensitivity, a right intuition. The Reish Galusa should be from Malchus Beis David, Zera Malucha. But the Novi had said, now we have to go low profile. We can't risk giving the forces of Nebuchadnezzar, the Amasla, give them reason, ammunition against us that, we're starting to rebel. Wrong time. You want to put the Shem Hashem in a star. Pride. Rebbeinu Shalom, we want to celebrate now this freedom. Yeah, but there's a takola, there's a downside. Criteria must always support or challenge the intuition. Do we want to take the energy, the thrust of that intuition? Yes. But we have to quantify it. We have to qualify it. Criteria. It has to pass muster. Klal Yisrael feels, understands the relationship to Yom Kippur. Odem Arishon, Klal Yisrael, Luchas Shniyas, that is a healthy, a real, but not everybody's going to respond, but a high percentage. Mentioned in the past, some of you may remember, I once asked Rabbi Yosef Tzendler, Zecher Tzadik Livrocha, that Sechvi, it's rooster, and in Sefer Eov, it's heart. What's the relationship between rooster and heart? And he said, just like the rooster can sense the dawn before it's measurable, it's visible, similarly the heart has its ability to anticipate intuitively, to sense a truth. And with that, I answered another shaila that I'd had. Pasuk says, "V'yodata hayom v'ashivoseh levavecha." We say it 3 times a day. You should know it today and return it to your heart. You don't return something to a place that it never was. It doesn't say place it, it says return it. So all of our appreciation of truth, of emes, goes 3 steps. It's that which is implanted with the Rebbeinu Shalom. The embryo learns Torah. Yimon Nida says. That nefesh, that neshama, made to forget it, so it should be a challenge. Why do 2 steps? It's the deja vu of the soul, we say. You're coming back to something you once knew. But yodato hayom, filter it. Let's hear the rationale. Shoot down that which is not applicable. And then bring it back to your heart. So Yishmael ben Nesanya, the tragedy is a right idea in the wrong application. Subjectively self-serving. And it leads to murder of the Gadol Hador. And that's why the Gemara asks the kasha, not a fact, a historic fact. But intuition can get us to where we have to go. If it fits the objective surgical criteria of the halachic process. So, we stand, associate tshuva, preparing for Yom Kippur. There is a groundswell of collective emotion. And we have to know how to capture it, how to apply it. The first tshuva of the first man was that day. Klal Yisrael, Luchas Shniyas, Yom Kippur. And if we have that sense from within, then let's capture it and use the halacha, the learning, the seder of the tefillas, to maximize the momentum, the energy of that sensitivity.